Moving to a new city always comes with a sense of excitement. But for me, it was just the beginning of a new life. I'm the kind of person who enjoys peace and quiet, so I chose an apartment in an old building. It stood in the city center with tall windows and worn-out doors. But when you're looking for calmness, such buildings seem like a true refuge. I wasn't particularly interested in my neighbors, and honestly, I couldn't even remember their faces, except for one. At the end of the hallway, right across from my door, lived him. My nightmare neighbor. He was strange, but not in a way that drew immediate attention. No, he was quiet. Almost too quiet. I rarely heard his footsteps behind the wall. And if I did, they were so soft. It felt as if no one was there at all. His apartment door was always closed, and he looked like someone who wasn't used to socializing. And everything would have remained that way if it weren't for one evening when I heard something strange. At first it was something unclear. Screams? No, not exactly. Sounds? Yes, but not loud enough to wake someone up. It could have been anything. Not quite screams, but some weird, low noise. Almost like scraping. But in between those sounds I heard something else. The rustle of footsteps. Footsteps that moved one way, then stopped, and then returned again. But how could he move so quickly in his apartment? If I'd only seen him a couple of times all week. I couldn't just ignore it. By that point, I'd already gotten somewhat used to this building. But that neighbor was too intriguing for me. That night, I decided to find out what was going on. A thought flashed through my mind. I'll just grab my phone and call the police. But when I approached the door, I noticed that his door was slightly ajar. I don't know why, but I couldn't just ignore that. The decision was made. I slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside. Inside, everything was just as quiet, the same stale smell of dust and old books. On the walls hung some paintings with blurry images, and in the corner stood a strange shelf with no items on it. I moved further down the hallway when suddenly I heard a rustling sound. It came from deep inside the apartment. I stopped, listening closely. God, I didn't want to go any further, but curiosity was winning. Eventually, a door creaked open. In the dark room stood my neighbor, and I could make out his silhouette. He was very thin and tall, with a head that seemed too large for his body. He wore an old, worn-out robe, and his arms stretched out as if he was moments away from grabbing something. "What are you doing here?" His voice sounded like crystal cracking under pressure. I couldn't say a word. He moved closer to me, and at that moment, I realized that he wasn't human. He was something that shouldn't exist. He was something that had crawled into this world and was trying to live among us. I didn't know what to do. Fear paralyzed me. Then my neighbor smiled. He smiled as if he enjoyed my fear. He stepped back toward an old table where several books were laid out. He picked one up and opened it to a page with an image of some kind of rune. I didn't know what it was, but I felt the ground start to shift beneath my feet. "Don't be afraid," he said. "You've already come too far. You're in my world now." The world around me changed. The shadows grew longer, and the rooms began to distort. I realized that I couldn't just leave. His power was stronger. This house, it wasn't just a house. It was a place where creatures like him lived. And then I realized my neighbor was guarding the entrance to this world. And anyone who came too close ended up trapped in his snare. And at that moment, I knew I would never get out of here.